Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean, and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to continue talking about staff development, and today specifically we're going to be discussing your team's role on the training floor and off the training floor, and also how to keep your team accountable. Setting up a hierarchy on the training floor is important. Your students, your staff, needs to know who's in charge at any given moment. Setting up a hierarchy on the training floor is important. Your students, your staff, need to know who's in charge at any given moment. Of course, with this hierarchy, it's important that as you move up the teaching ranks that you still have an understanding of what everybody else's responsibilities are. It's hard to step into a high-ranking position and not having done all the jobs that came before it, because you don't necessarily know the ins and outs of what those team members are supposed to be doing. Fortunately for the martial arts, nearly every single time the person that's in that higher ranking position, in the top of the hierarchy, knows how to do all of the other people's team members' jobs. They know what to be expected of them. They know if they're not doing something quite the way they're supposed to be doing, because they've been there, they've done that job. They know what really needs to get done in order to help the flow of instruction along the way. As a team member, you have an understanding of what it's like to be a student, right? Any one of your team members know what it's like to be a student. They've all been there. They're hopefully currently still students. As the head instructor, you have an understanding of what it's like to be a team member, right? So you're just building up that hierarchy. As the owner, you have an understanding of what it's like to be the head instructor. And for lots of people, if you are the head instructor, more often than not, you're also the owner of the school. And so those kind of go hand in hand anyways. At any level, your team needs to know how to perform the role of the individual below them. And basically what that means is if somebody's sick or can't make it in, or you need an extra a fill-in for a staff member, if you pull somebody that is in a higher up in that hierarchy, you should be able to pull them in and say, hey, I need you to do this job today. I know you already are, eight steps ahead of this, fine, but I know you also know how to do this job really well because you've done it for a long time previously, so I need you to be in this role. And the nice thing is, for the head instructor, the owner, for the people higher up on that hierarchy, it is nice on occasion to put yourself into the role of a lower person on the hierarchy. Because what that does is that gives you the opportunity to switch roles. And so if you're not teaching the class, that means somebody else is going to step in and teach the class. And perhaps that somebody is somebody that doesn't normally or doesn't generally teach that class. And so you're moving somebody up the hierarchy, at least for a class or so. And as you move down the hierarchy, that gives you an opportunity to show your team members what you would like to be done, what to be expected, how to perhaps perform their job in a more efficient or effective way, because you know what you want. And on occasion, we've done this here, and it's really nice to be able to hear the feedback from the person that's in that head instructor role for that class. If we do like a surprise instructor day, that's from time to time, that's what we call it here. So we will say, okay, surprise instructor day, you're going to teach this class and I'm going to be assisting you. And that is a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes for that person that is, oh, I have to teach this class now. Okay, well, it's not too hard. You just follow the lesson plan. They've all done it before. It just puts you in that little bit different role. But what it does for you, the person that generally teaches that class, is it gives you an opportunity to help to fill in the blank, right? So as that new instructor, that surprise instructor is teaching the class, you get to go along and set things up ahead of time. You get to have the insight of knowing what's going to happen next and how generally it should play out, and assist in such a way that falls out the way that it should fall out. And then at the end of that class, go to that team member that taught the class for that surprise instructor day and get feedback. Hey, as you were teaching that class, what did you notice? What was helpful? What did I do that was beneficial to this? And then get that list. And then as you are able to go back and switch roles into a quote unquote normal flow, where you're the you're the normal instructor, you're that instructor, and the team member is the team member, see if they're able to pick up those things that were helpful for you and see if they start doing those to help continue the class and have the flow appropriate. Now, if you set up an opportunity to do that surprise instructor type class, as the head instructor, you have to be able to pull yourself in and not take over the class, right? So if you give somebody else the responsibility of running that class or this drill or this the warm up or whatever it is, if you give somebody else that responsibility, you need to help them, but not do it for them, right? So you can't step in and think, well, they're doing this. This is so wrong. It's not how I would do it at all. Different does not equal wrong. Different is just different. Everybody's going to teach differently. Everybody. To try to carbon copy yourself into your team members will be a failed experiment because you cannot duplicate yourself. They're going to do things like you do them, sure, absolutely. But they're also going to have their own take on it, their own influences, their own eye of what they're looking for. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, it's just different. And so if you give somebody the responsibility to lead whatever it is during your class, you need to give them that responsibility. Don't say, hey, I want you to do this. And then as soon as they do something different than you, step in and take over for them. That is definitely not the way to handle that. And if you do that, if you step in over them and take over for them, you're going to be discrediting their instruction in the student's eyes. Anytime that person then is leading those students that watched you take over for them, they're going to think, well, I'm just going to not do anything. We'll wait for the actual instructor to come over and tell us what to do because this guy's a joke. He doesn't really know. Now, maybe not every student's going to take that way, but for sure, a good percentage of your students will lower their standards, lower their, what's the
opinion?
Lower your students will lower their opinion of that instructor anytime and every time you step in and take over for them. So be very careful of the things that you let your team members lead. And if and when you do that, fully let them do it. If there's issues or something's happening, deal with it at the end. As long as nobody's going to get hurt, and then you would step in and do something. As long as nobody gets hurt, you just let it go, deal with whatever it is at the end, and then talk about it and how it could be better for next time. But if you decide to let and give somebody the responsibility, give that to them. Don't take it away halfway.
There's a couple of things this ties back into, which we've already covered before. Number one being the leaving space for the instructors to come into it and the way they teach and out of their own accord, in the sense that, like you said, you don't want to make a carbon copy of yourself and try to copy yourself over and over again and have instructors be just like you, because it's just not going to work, because we're all different. We all do things differently. So having those expectations of them being exactly like you sets everyone else up for failure and ultimately sets you up for failure. You need to, hold the line on certain things and then be more flexible on other things and copy them maybe 80% of you, and then allow that last 20% for them to put their own spin to it or be their own person, because that's really going to be the best that they can be, is when they're able to do things their own way. And like you said, as long as it lines up with what you are looking for and no one's getting hurt while it's happening, we want to have, and we also want to encourage that kind of individuality and letting them take ownership and make it their own when they're teaching. And that's the first thing. And the second thing being, like you said, we don't want to correct or tear down those staff members in front of students, or in some cases in front of other staff members, depending on the situation, depending on what happened. So like we talked about just the last episode in our staff meetings, we talk about those things in our staff meetings in that kind of setting. We don't deal with them in front of students on the floor unless it's a emergency or someone's being put in harm's way, because we can always go back and correct those small mistakes. But it'd be a lot harder once we have diminished our students' opinion of that instructor to gain that back than it would be to fix a small mistake. So not only is it working on not only are we talking about letting them have ownership and be themselves when they're teaching. But also, when you do have to make a correction, make sure it's done in private. You can praise them in public and correct them in private, which again is something we've already discussed before. So just not to sound or repeat many things that we're saying, but it's interesting to kind of see now at this point how everything is starting to overlap and kind of go together with things that we've already discussed.
Yes, sir. You know, if you decide to do your surprise instructor day, a couple notes on that. If you do it in a surprise, you know, the class is about to start and I turn to Master Ken, okay, surprise, you're going to teach this class. You know, minutes or seconds before it's supposed to start would probably not be the best way. And perhaps surprise instructor day is maybe not the best name for this. It would be a surprise at the beginning of the day. Hey, surprise, I'm going to have you teach the intermediate class for today. So be sure to check the lesson plan before that time, have an idea of the drills and the skills that you're going to have them do, and then let me know if you have any questions and try to set them up for success. This can even be something you do a week ahead of time. Hey, listen, next week, I want you to teach this beginner's class, and I'm going to be here to, you know, every step of the way to, you know, to give you feedback, and if you need a hand, I'm here, but I really want you to have the opportunity to try to step outside of your comfort zone and lead this whole class. And understand that this will be a step outside of their comfort zone. If your team hasn't been in front of the students teaching a class, leading a group is, and perhaps you would maybe disagree or agree, leading a group is so much easier than leading a class. Leading a class is at times very nerve-wracking, especially in the very beginning. Leading a group is to a certain extent, but that gets really comfortable really easily because you got, you know, 10 people in your group and you pretty well know all of them. Especially if you've led that group time and time again. A whole class might still be people that you know and are comfortable with talking one-on-one, but talking to all of them all at one time, it can certainly be tough, right? And would you agree that teaching groups or leading groups is what, 50% easier than teaching a class?
Yes, sir. I would agree. I think another thing that feeds into that too is that when you're running a class, all eyes are on you. Not only students, but parents and anybody else that's there. You are the one that they're looking at, as opposed to when you're in a group, you know, generally or typically there's a handful of other groups going at the same time. So your attention is divided, or it's easier to kind of, for lack of a better word, to hide in the middle of everything else that's going on. But when you're leading that class, it's you, and everyone's listening to you and looking to you for instruction, and you're on the spot. You know, you got that spotlight on you during the play that is your class. So I would agree. Yes, it's a lot different, and it does get easier, just like anything does, the more you do it. But in these scenarios, whether it be their first time or one of their first times when they're put in this role of leading the class, it can still be nerve-wracking and scary. So just also keeping in mind, as a head instructor maybe who's done it for a long time, try to put yourself in their shoes and remember what you felt like. And maybe you didn't feel like that, or maybe you can't remember what that felt like, but then just keep in mind logically an idea of how they are going to feel or probably will feel being in that position for the first or one of the first few times.
And you kind of have to think about this like a public speaking experience. What is it, like the second most feared thing over death is public speaking. And so being up in front of the class is public speaking, right? You have to be able to convey your thoughts, convey your teachings in such a way that, you know, the lowest common denominator can understand it. But also you have to be comfortable with being in that position, knowing when to put your pauses, being able to think ahead what you're going to do and say, and have a kind of a game plan of what's going to happen. And sometimes that will come from experience, doing it and failing lots of times, and your class is just, you know, they're right there learning along with you. As you're trying to learn how to teach, they're learning their moves, and you're trying to figure things out as you go. But again, understand that if you put your team member in that role, that perhaps is a big step outside of their comfort zone. Now, being outside your comfort zone, I think, is a wonderful thing, because that's where growth is going to happen. right? If you just stay inside your bubble, you're not going to grow, you're not going to expand, you're not going to be better at anything. So moving outside of your comfort zone is I fully believe is a wonderful thing to do. And you should do it in lots of different areas of your life just because there's so much growth that will happen. But people are terrified of change. And public speaking is right up there on top of their list of things that nobody wants to do. And so perhaps envision what that's going to be like for that person. And depending on what that's going to be like for that person, maybe you give them a bigger window ahead of time to prepare for it. Give them an opportunity to rehearse some class at home. Give them some tips and things. Hey, listen, over the weekend, I want you to try this. I get you're going to do it at home. No one's actually going to be there, but at least rehearse these things so you have an idea of what it's going to be like when you do it live in person with real people there watching you. Just understand that again, is going to be perhaps a very scary thing for people to do the first handful of times. Obviously, everybody will get better at it as long as you give them those key factors to improve on. And again, as always, pick the improvement that's going to have the most overarching effect and then work down from there.
Alternatively, or even on top of that, instead of doing this for an entire class, maybe just give them a section of the class. So depending on how your class is structured and what the lesson plan is for that day, maybe you say, okay, beforehand, not right before, seconds before, minutes before, the day of, or a week before, depending on the person, you just say, hey, today or this day, I would like you to lead the 15-minute section on forms, or I'd like you to run the 10-minute section on hand techniques, foot techniques, self-defense, whatever it is. Give them just a chunk of that class to be in that leading role. So then they get a taste for that, and it's not as intimidating as leading an entire class. Now, don't leave it at that. Eventually, you want to continue to build up and then give them responsibility for more things and eventually have them lead the entire class as it is. But it's kind of another way to ease them into it, kind of break the ice of the lead role, and then again, not to throw it all at once at them, but kind of take baby steps up into that position. So, if you have someone, or maybe just across the board, to do that for anybody, whether they be more nervous to be speaking in public or not as sure of themselves, give them a little bit to take care of first of all, and then give them praise, give them the correction, and they can do more and more and more and build up to that larger class. So again, it doesn't have to be all at once. It can be an incremental type thing, just like our teaching is, not all at once, and more of that tower we're building, the foundation, and adding levels to it, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. So with your team, all of your team members, you want to be able to set expectations for them. And it's important on these expectations to be as specific as you can. If you set a vague goal or system to follow, when inevitably they're not able to live up to that because they didn't do exactly what you wanted, because you didn't tell them exactly what you wanted, you're going to have to intervene and do it for them or reprimand them. So when you set up these things up, your goals, your systems, be as specific as you can so that they can follow as specifically as you want them to follow. Your expectations should be simple and clear so everyone can understand all of the intent and goal and purpose behind what your expectations are. Specific, but simple. Easy to understand across all areas of anybody that's going to try to step in and try to fill those expectations. The reason behind this is to allow your team to make decisions and answer quickly. If they're asked any questions on the floor, if your office personnel, whatever, if they have a parent that comes to them and say, hey, listen, I need to know the answer for this. You want to give them kind of the rules and guidelines to play within, but also give them the ability, give them the ownership to be able to answer things and not, I don't know, I have to ask Master Kent. I don't know. I have to check with Master Bean. You don't want that to be the always scenario, because then you are consistently bombarded with those questions that really the answer is yes. And they know the answer is yes. And they say, well, I probably would have told them yes, but I thought I should check with you. And no, just yes. Yes is the answer, right? You want to be able to set your team up so they are in line and they understand your rules and your guidelines and your goals that you want the students to have, that you want the staff to have, so that if and when they're asked those questions, they can answer them. And From time to time, of course, anybody perhaps is going to answer incorrectly. And if that happens, fine, you deal with the situation. Actually, it's going to be this, and here's the reason why. And then they go and fix that issue. No problem. Absolutely, that's going to happen from time to time. But the more in line, the more in sync you are with your team, the more clear and concise and simple and easy to understand your expectations are, the easier that process is going to be. Now, of course, there's going to be things they're really not going to know, not going to be able to answer. Then they'll come to you, you give them the answer, you give them the understanding of why you answered that. Then in the future, they have the opportunity, they can answer that themselves. They don't have to come back to you every single time they're asked the question. If need be, when you're laying out these expectations, have your team repeat back to you how they understand what you want them to do. Oftentimes, you'll explain it in a way that you understand, but you use words or terms or whatever it is that doesn't quite relate to who you're talking to, or you have the end goal in mind and you just do this and put the thing here, done. And everybody else is like, I need more clarity. I don't understand that. But they might not feel comfortable with saying, I don't understand, or say that somehow again differently, so perhaps I can understand. So in these situations, giving them the expectations, but then having them repeat back, okay, listen, I want you to do this, and this. Okay, now tell me what I would like you to do. Okay, this, and they can tell it to you. Great. If they can tell it back to you, then you know that they understand and they're hopefully able to do it, and then they can go do it. Having that refreshed and returned back to you again is just an extra step, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page as you. Because you can ask, all right, everybody understand? And nobody quite wants to say, no, I don't understand. So having them repeat it back will help to ensure that everybody on your team does actually understand what you're asking of them.
It can also be used on the teaching floor as well. I know we're talking about your staff, but that's something important to make sure that's happening on the floor as well. That everyone's understanding you and knows what is expected from you. And we've touched on it already a little bit, to have those clear-cut and defined expectations of your students. But this is another reminder to make sure that we're setting expectations for everybody. And then, like you said, a way to make sure that we're all on the same page is to have them repeat it back, or make sure they understand and know what's going on. It's good not only for your staff, but for students too.
Absolutely. And of course, once you have your goals and your processes and your systems laid out, and your team knows what's expected of them, they will know what's expected of them, and they will be able to live up to those expectations. Keeping your team accountable. Your team members, just as your students, need to be continuing their training. How can you have somebody on your team teaching on the training floor that's not currently training in class? There's a disconnect there. Clearly, hopefully you can understand. What kind of standard does that set for your students? If they see, Mr. So-and-so teaching class, okay, hey, when do you come to class? I want to watch you. I don't do class anymore. I'm too good. Nope, you don't want that. Don't want that. That's a terrible situation. So if you have a team member that's in class, teaching or assisting with class, they need to be continuing their training. If that means that you don't quite have a class for them and you need to set up some one-on-one training for them, then set up one-on-one training for them. But everybody on your teaching floor needs to be also training themselves, because there's no way that they can sustain and keep up on that material if they're not training that. Sure, teaching is extremely helpful in recalling and reviewing that information to a certain extent, but if you're not practicing it, if you're not doing it on your own for yourself, then you're going to be lost in trying to figure out on different ways and explanations to use, especially when people have trouble understanding the first, like your go-to explanation doesn't work. You're going to have a tough time trying to find secondary or more explanations to deliver if you're not on the floor training yourself or themselves, depending on the scenario. Along with this, I believe it's necessary to have your team regularly qualify on the material that they're teaching. Now, this kind of goes along with training. If your team is training in class, they are testing regularly, and you get to see them test over those that material. So you get to make sure they're qualifying or they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it the right way in line with the way that you want it to be done, so they can teach it in the way that all those things as well. If you don't already have something like that in place, if you don't have a situation where your black belt students are reviewing or rehearsing or testing over or qualifying over those below black belt information, if depending on how your curriculum or your lesson plans are situated or set up, then come up with that in your staff meeting. Have a once a quarter. Okay, listen, hey guys, I'm going to quiz you. We're going to qualify over the form. Teach me how to do this form or this kata or this pattern of moves or this hand tech, whatever it is. Maybe do it in sections, right? And allow them a chance to teach it to you. And maybe instead of just teaching it to you, they have to do it. Okay, now that I see that you can do it, now teach it to me. Teach it to me like I'm a blue belt. And that's the level that belt learns that form or that move, and they have to teach it to you based on that level. Setting up situations like this, I believe, can be very beneficial because, again, if you don't go back and check those things, if you don't have something in place to check in to make sure that your team actually knows those things, then quickly it can be the case that your students are not learning the information that you want them to learn because your staff doesn't know it. So setting up a qualifying, a test, a quiz, whatever you want to call it, so that your team is checked on that information can be important to make sure that everybody's on the same page, doing things that everybody's supposed to do it, and everybody's in line with the way that you want it to be run as your school. Another great tool to add to your staff is performance reviews. You can do this on whatever time basis that you want, but have some sort of performance review so you can sit down and have a one-on-one talk with that staff member and tell them the things that they are doing well, the things that they are excelling at, and maybe some areas that they need to work on as well. And doing this across the board for everybody, whether it's somebody on the training floor, your office personnel, whatever it is, but having an opportunity where you can sit down and give them a review. Hey, listen, you did really great with this, and you went above and beyond. I was so surprised. Why didn't I even think of that? That was awesome. Good job. Now, these are some areas that maybe we can improve on, and then you give them some steps to improve on those. And maybe you want to do those opposite. Maybe you want to start with the negative and then end with the positive. However you want to do that, but you have to both give them the things that they're doing well at and some things they need to improve on, or again, vice versa. But do that on a one-on-one basis. That shouldn't be done out in front of everybody. So that means you get on the phone and you call them because you don't have offices or space or time set up for your class or your school to do that. Then do that. But it needs to be a one-on-one communication that you talk to them and get feedback from them, and then tell them some things that you would like them to improve on, and so on. Have a performance review. Again, you could do this on a monthly. You can do this on a quarterly. You can do this, twice a year. Twice a year maybe is a little bit long, and I probably wouldn't recommend doing it yearly. That would be far stretch, but maybe quarterly, every 3 months, 4 months or so would be probably right around the right time to do that. And of course you can set this up and have a numbers thing, and where these are the things we're looking at. Let them know ahead of time. Listen, we're going to start doing performance reviews. These are the things I'm going to be grading you on. You're going to get a number score between 1 and 5. 5 is you excelled, went above and beyond. 1 is you might need some work on this, and I'll write some notes on those things. And it's going to be how you present yourself, whether you show up to work on time. Are you ready when work starts? How are you able to communicate with the clients? Whatever specifications you want for that, you could probably even Google and find some that will work for you. But having a performance review system in place, I think, will greatly, pretty well, rocket ship your staff to a new height, because you're going to give them things that they're doing well on, which means you are praising them. Everybody likes to hear praise. And then you're also giving them things to work on so they can work on those things that maybe they're not doing so well. And if you give that in a loving and caring way, especially aided by the praise, wonderful. Absolutely super beneficial for your team.
And whether or not you choose to use, a actual physical paper with numbers or scores or whatever it is, in some way, keep notes, both you and the staff member, of what you guys talked about, what you did good, what you need to improve on. That way you can go back and look at those things rather than, 3 months later, 6 months later, being like, oh yeah, well, what was it you're supposed to work on last time? And either neither of you know, or they make something up, and no real progress is made necessarily. So again, whether it be a physical thing that you score them with, or just some way of tracking between, not only for you, but also for that staff member. If you're on that phone call, you're in that meeting, you say, hey, write this down and put it somewhere that you can look at every day you come to work, or every day that you're at home, or wherever it be. That way you're constantly reminded to work on this thing, or you're constantly reminded how well you're doing this one thing to keep up that thing. Again, just having it written down and documented somewhere is going to be good for you and for that staff member to keep that in mind. And then again, not to have to remember the next time that performance review comes around, oh yeah, what was it that we were working on? And no one knows. So it seems kind of self-explanatory, but it's an easy step to miss, I think.
Now, of course, after you give that feedback to your team, depending on how important that feedback is, or how big of a issue it was, or on perhaps even on that individual, have some sort of a check-in. So you have your performance review quarterly. So every 3 months you do a quarterly review, check in. You give them the feedback. You did well on this, and you had to improve on these things. Maybe a month later, have a check-in. Okay, hey, listen, we talked about improving on these areas. So far, you've done really good on this one, really good on this one. This one, I think, could still use some extra work. Here's some tips and tools on how perhaps you can improve in that area. So have a check-in, maybe a month or so later. And depending on if that team member needs extra help with those, you have a check-in, the next month, and you kind of go all the way through to the next performance review, which hopefully then will be able to improve on those things that needed to be improved on, and then so on. You can give them extra beneficial critiques as you move on. For some situations, having a monthly check-in or a check-in 1 month after the performance review can be beneficial, just to make sure everything is going to be going in line with the way that you would like it to.
At the very least, it shows them that you are invested and that you care about their improvement, not only individually, but as a team. So rather than just having that meeting and saying something off the cuff and never addressing it again, it's showing them that you are genuinely invested in them getting better and overcoming those obstacles.
And you may find that you need to remind them of what their focus should be. Hey, these are the key areas that we talked about that need to be improved. So let's make sure that as we're going, we're focusing on improving this thing, right? Have that refocus of whatever the improvement is or needs to be. Again, having that check-in time would be a great time to get their feedback to see how they think they're progressing along that line as well. If they think they've noticed any improvement or any changes on the floor, in the office, or whatever the situation is. Using a method like this, your team will know that they're always being evaluated, and that will put them in an improvement mindset because they know they're kind of on camera, right? Anytime they're there, you can be looking for things that they're doing well, and you can be looking for things that need to be improved. And so by setting up that type of atmosphere will hopefully help to foster a improvement mindset. Now, if you do it correctly, it will improve. It'll have an improvement mindset. Otherwise, it will have a complete opposite of that. And you as the head instructor, owner, whatever that person is, the manager, will be seen as perhaps the enemy. Oh man, he's here, so I gotta actually do stuff. Right? You don't want that. You want to have it in a loving, caring way, so that you genuinely want them to improve, and they also want to improve, and not seen like, oh well, I guess I have to actually do stuff because Joe's here now. All right, class, let's go. You don't want that. And if you have people like that in your team, you likely know at this point, you perhaps need to have a sit down with them to discuss how to improve that. If you can do this in, again, a loving, caring way, this will be a great team building exercise for you. Be careful not to criticize So you want to see, hey, listen, you did this really well, and if you worked on this area, you would be improved so much better, so much more, so much better. Awesome. Great. You want to not criticize, just like with your students. You don't want to give them, you don't want to give them, 20 things they need to work on. So with your staff, same thing. You don't want to give them 20 things to work on. Don't criticize them. Just pick a couple of key areas that they can improve on, and then give them some tips and some tools of how to do that. Do your best to have one key area of focus. You can have a few secondary things that are kind of lower on the list, but make sure you convey that to your team member, this is the big thing. I think if you improve this one, all of these other things will fall in line. Of course, you have to genuinely mean that, and it has to actually work that way. But give them one key area of focus. Just like with your students, again, you don't want to overload them. Don't overload your staff. Give them one key area to improve on, and then see that through. And then at the next performance review, then you can choose the next thing, see that through, and so on. This, again, will skyrocket your team to the next level.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I think the 3 big takeaways for today are making sure your staff understands their roles, whether it be on the teaching floor or in the office, and then making sure that up and down the hierarchy, you have people who are able to step into those other roles, and do what needs to be done, or give a good example of how to best perform in that role. Also setting expectations up for your staff of what you expect for them, making it simple and clear. That way everyone can understand, and making sure they do understand what you expect from them. And then on top of that, keeping them accountable, whether it be through, one-on-one check-ins or meetings or evaluations, just making sure that those improvements and those things that you expect from them are being followed through with, and then making sure that they are improving to help themselves, help our students, and help us as a team in general.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And where can our listeners dive into to see us some more or hear us some more?
Yes, sir. As usual, on social media, they can find us at MA Teaching Tactics. It's MA for Martial Arts Teaching Tactics. Again, that is MA Teaching Tactics. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, Twitter. We're online. Search MA Teaching Tactics. We're there.
Yes, sir. Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.